Hello, everyone, and welcome to our newest stream. We're back with Lindsay Wilson today, again, the IPV Assistance Program Coordinator at the VA Maryland Healthcare System. And today she is going to speak to us about RISE. So, welcome, Lindsay. Thank you for joining us today. And we are all interested in learning about RISE, which I am assuming is for people who are victims of domestic violence.
Yes. Thank you again for having me. So RISE stands for, because it's an acronym, like everything here, it's recovering from intimate partner violence through strength and empowerment. So it's kind of a mouthful, so we just call it RISE, but it is for people who are currently experiencing intimate partner violence or recently experienced intimate partner violence.
So, what can you define what interpartner violence looks like? Because a lot of people think of, those TV things where someone's bruised and battered. But in my reporter days, I did cover domestic violence and learned that it actually was a whole lot more than that. So, can you define domestic violence, maybe point out the signs of domestic violence in case people don't know,
Sure,
and let us know
absolutely.
how RISE helps.
Yeah, so intimate partner violence, like you said, it's sort of a whole range of behaviors. I think we think often of physical violence. And I'll just say before I get more into it, I think sometimes we use intimate partner violence and domestic violence interchangeably. Often they kind of mean the same thing. Broadly, domestic violence refers to kind of things that happen in the domestic sphere. So it can include intimate partner violence, but also like child abuse, elder abuse. Intimate partner violence, you don't have to like live with someone. You can just be dating too. So there's a lot of overlap. So people use them interchangeably. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So just to avoid any confusion. But intimate partner violence or domestic violence can include also, in addition to physical violence, there's psychological abuse. So sometimes people use verbal, emotional abuse, stalking behaviors, sexual abuse, or coercion. It's something that can really happen to anybody. I think that we maybe often particularly picture women as the people it happens to, right? That men are doing this to women, and that happens a lot, but that's not the full extent of it, right? We have a lot of people who are men who might be experiencing abuse from female partners. We have a lot of people who are in same-sex relationships who experience abuse. It can happen to people regardless of like age, race, socioeconomic status. And it can be something, for some people, it's something that happens like every day, and it can be really bad. For some people, it's something that maybe happens on an episodic basis or just when a partner drinks or something like that. So it can look very different. There's sort of a wide range, but generally it's really physical, sexual, psychological violence, stalking behaviors, those sorts of things that's coming from an intimate partner. So maybe a spouse, someone you're dating, something like that.
So it wouldn't actually be like siblings or anything like that. That would fall under the domestic violence umbrella.
Correct. Yeah. And our program specifically focuses on kind of like the intimate partners, like dating, spouses, that sort of thing.
So the relationships that have a romantic component to them.
Yes.
So how does one recognize whether one is experiencing IPV, especially when it's subtle? It's subtle always in the beginning. So how does one recognize that psychological abuse or manipulation or gaslighting?
So there's definitely some like red flags and warning signs. I think if you're seeing behavior from a partner that they're maybe trying to isolate you from other people, from your friends and family, that can be a real red flag. They're exhibiting controlling behavior, so trying to maybe make decisions for you that should be yours to make about where you're going, who you're spending time with, what you're doing. Sometimes being really hypercritical. Sometimes if they have an outburst or get angry, they might blame you for it. Things like that. Sometimes threats, and they don't have to be intense threats, but like, if you don't do this, I will do this. Sometimes they might be excessively jealous, want to know kind of who you're with, who you're talking to, want to maybe look at your devices, know where you're going. They might try to take control of finances. That can be a really difficult dynamic to maybe see at first and then get out of also, if that's something there. And I think sometimes, if you have someone that's trying to like talk down to you, insult you, humiliate or embarrass you in front of other people, I think those are some signs. If you feel like you're being manipulated, maybe this person's not displaying remorse, right? Maybe they hurt your feelings or hurt you and they're not expressing remorse for it. That's something that you might want to be on the lookout for. And I think sometimes generally kind of, aggressive behavior, outbursts of anger, physical violence, even if it's maybe not directed at you, but sometimes it might be directed at like objects, especially maybe your objects. So I think things like that are things you can be on the lookout for sure.
And so once people figure out, oh, this person is trying to control me, or this person is trying to get control of my finances, or this person is isolating, acting really weird when I want to see my parents or siblings or spend time with my sister or brother, what can people do? And I'm guessing this is where RISE steps in.
Yeah. So RISE can definitely be something to help. I think our program generally can help with this because we want to help make sure people are connected to whatever resources that they need and do safety planning. Sometimes I think it might be a sort of widely known fact that leaving an abusive relationship can be one of the most dangerous times. So we can talk about how to do that safely. Even if you don't do RISE. RISE, I think, is really helpful when people are kind of struggling a little bit with what they want to do, because we know that being in a relationship where there's abuse can be really like disempowering, right? Because the other person is trying to take control and make decisions for you, and it can be hard to like come out of that a little bit. So RISE aims to try to, kind of put the ball back in your court, help you figure out what your goals are, what are things that you really want to work toward, and then take the steps to do that.
So what does being a participant in the RISE program actually look like? Do you meet regularly? Is it virtual? Do you have homework? Do you give your participants homework? Like, what does it look like?
So it is RISE is individual, and right now I am the one trained staff member here, so you will meet with me most likely. I tend to meet about weekly with everyone in the program. Obviously, sometimes things come up and we might meet like every other week, but usually I meet about weekly with folks. There is a manual we like go through depending on the topic they choose, and I can go over what those are. We kind of walk through some material and talk about how it applies to them. There's not really homework, although at the end of each session, they do set a goal of something they want to work on, usually related to the material that we talked about. And then when we meet next, we kind of check in on like, is that something you've been able to work on? How is it going? What do things look like? So not specific homework, but kind of more general, like, we set this goal and we'll check in on progress toward it.
So for those spouses or significant others of people who are using violence or trying to gain control, and let's say they don't want to separate, they just want to make things better. Is that possible through the training and education with RISE to be able to call someone out when they're trying to be controlling or to stand up to a person, or does that escalate the situation?
Well, I think what it looks like specifically might depend on the specific relationship, but I think that you can do RISE if you want to remain in your relationship. You don't have to like want to be leaving. And I think that some of the skills are useful. Like I'm working with veterans who are still in relationships, and in one of the sessions we talk about assertive communication. And I know one of the veterans I've been working with has been finding it helpful to be able to communicate more assertively because, she's usually more passive. And also, I think you know, there is not an excuse for another person to behave in an abusive way towards you. But also, if you don't communicate assertively, sometimes that can make it hard for your partner to kind of know what's going on and to know how to respond. Especially if you communicate aggressively, that makes people defensive. So I think that, you know, you can pick up some skills and rise and a sense of empowerment that does allow you to communicate more effectively in your relationship in a way that can maybe adjust the dynamic. Certainly, obviously, there are things on the other side to work on too. But so far, I think, you know, people can find it helpful. And maybe ultimately through working through this, they decide that maybe this isn't the relationship for them. But, you know, it does give you some skills to kind of take steps for sure.
So, can you show us, the people who are watching, the difference between assertive communication and aggressive communication? Because a lot of people mistake the word aggressive and assertive to mean the same thing, and they really do not. So, can you demonstrate what the difference is?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think too, I will also say, I think sometimes like the isms come to play in that. I think sometimes when women are assertive, it's interpreted as aggressive, and particularly like women of color. So I think that's an important one to, you know, just like recognize. The main kind of overall difference is that, you know, an assertive message, you want to get your point across, express your feelings and concerns, but in a way that's respectful, that allows for the other person to kind of have some space to communicate. And aggressive communication is sort of the opposite, right? You're getting your point across, but you're doing it in a way that does not allow the other person to get their point across. So let's say hypothetically, you are upset with your partner for leaving their clothes on the floor instead of putting them in the hamper. If you're going to be aggressive, you might say, "You are such a slob and you are making our house dirty, leaving your clothes all over the floor. What is wrong with you?" That's aggressive. It's insulting. It's a lot of you. If you want to be assertive, you can say, like, "I feel frustrated when I come home and there are clothes on the floor. I would really like it if you put them in the hamper." You know,
it's
you
a
don't
lot
have
of
to.
I statements.
Yes.
No blaming.
Yes, that's sort of kind of a main piece of like assertive communication is starting with the I statement. Certainly not every I statement is like a perfect assertive message, but it's important to kind of start from a place of like, this is how I feel about the situation. Because that's something that you want to communicate with your partner, how you feel about things. And I think sometimes we get in a situation where we think that like how we feel is like the objective truth. And it actually isn't, right? Like we feel the way we feel about things because of who we are, about things we've been through, right? Like clothes laying down doesn't bother me as much, but it might really be annoying for other people, right? So it's important to start with that I feel this way about this, because it helps our partner kind of understand where we're coming from, and it doesn't put them on the defense necessarily, right? Because if you start with you,
insulting, you're not calling anybody a name.
Like if you're like you, then the person's like, well, hold up, like, you know, that kind of puts people on the defense. And starting with like, hey, here's how I feel about the situation. Can we do this? That opens up for a little bit more constructive dialogue from there. And obviously, you know, that's an example, but that's kind of the general feel of it.
No, I get it. So now let's talk about safety planning, because I think that may look different for each person depending on needs, whether or not there's children or pets involved, whether or not the person's pregnant or needs meds, or meds are being delivered. So what does that look like? Can you talk about how people who are in how RISE helps people get to the point of safety planning?
Yes. So RISE, I will say we start every session with a safety check-in. And one of the modules of RISE, and I'll go through them after all 7 of them, but safety planning is one of the first modules. And it's really just like a guided kind of talk through of a safety plan. And you alluded to it, but a safety plan for intimate partner violence looks different for everyone. So we might be making a safety plan for you staying in the relationship, and we're talking about how to keep yourself safe if there are moments of escalation of conflict. We might be talking about you leaving. So then we're talking about how to do that safely, because like I said, that can be a really difficult time. We might be talking about safety. Maybe you've left the relationship, but this person is still engaging with you, or you share children, or there's still some level of contact. So we can talk about safety in that context. And again, like you said, this doesn't just include your physical safety, but like your pets, your children. We're looking at, technology is a big thing that we always have to talk about. We're thinking about like the physical layout of your home. If you're still in the relationship, like, are there ways you can get out? Are there maybe rooms you should avoid if conflict is escalating? Like, for example, usually the kitchen is not a great place to be because there's a lot of things, unfortunately, that are dangerous in the kitchen. You maybe want to be in a room that you can get out of. So depending on the particular circumstances that the person finds themselves in, what safety looks like for them, and then how we can kind of best achieve that. So
a lot of people who may want to leave do not want to, they may want to leave, but they feel stymied because they do have a pet. Especially people who are childless and the pet is like the child figure. Does RISE help people navigate a situation where there's another living being that is, depending on the person who wants to leave, or maybe attached to the person using violence, and which itself might not be safe? So how does RISE approach that?
Yeah, so RISE really, and I think it might be a good time to talk about like how like a session goes. The idea really is like to meet you where you are and what you need. So like safety planning is one module of it. Resources and moving forward is another module of it. So there are kind of pieces where we touch on these things. So I will just say, so RISE, when I first meet with a person, we kind of start with an overview of what RISE is. And I get an overview from them of like what their situation is. So like what's going on. Are you still with this person? Are you leaving? Are you staying? What kind of abuse are we seeing in this relationship? We talk about self-efficacy as a concept. And what that means is sort of your belief in yourself that you can sort of navigate difficult situations. So that's something that we also check in about each time. We do a little, it's the general self-efficacy scale. So we do a little 10-question questionnaire at the beginning of every session to see where you are in terms of your self-efficacy. And we kind of track it over time. And usually, hopefully it's going up as we're kind of talking through these things. Once we do that, as I mentioned, we always do a safety check-in, and then the whoever is participating gets to choose which module we talk about that day. And there are 7 modules. So the cool thing about RISE is that it's very flexible. So maybe there's only like 3 of the 7 that you want to talk about. So then we only need to do 3 sessions. But if you want to talk about all of them, then we can do 7 or 8 sessions going through all the material. So it's very flexible. What the different modules are. So the first one is safety planning. That's kind of what we talked about. We walk through a safety plan depending on your situation, including children, pets, technology, etc. There's one that's about the health effects and warning signs of IPV. So in that one, we talk about all the different ways that experiencing intimate partner violence can impact your health physically, mentally, socially, during pregnancy, children. We talk about different warning signs and red flags to look for in relationships, which are some of the ones that we just talked about earlier. And that's also where we get into the assertive versus aggressive communication. So that one tends to be a longer one. There's a lot of material there. There's a module on improving coping and self-care. So, how can you take care of yourself? What are some relaxation strategies? There's one about enhancing social support, because isolation is a big issue when you're experiencing intimate partner violence. So in that module, we talk about who you might want support from, how you can reach out to them, what kind of support you need from other folks. There's one about making difficult decisions. So we kind of talk through a decision if you want to make a change in your relationship. So for some people, it is, do I want to leave this relationship? And we kind of talk about, well, what would be the benefits of leaving, but also what are the benefits of staying, right? What am I, and then what would be the costs of leaving? What are the costs of staying? And that really helps people, I think through all sides of the issue, because usually we just do the pros and cons of like one side of it, but there's pros of staying or else you wouldn't stay.
Well,
So
not all costs are tangible. I mean,
right.
some costs are, like you said, it might be physical or health wise or.
Yeah. For some people, the cost is like, I'm anxious all the time. Right. Like, so it's helpful for people when I've done that module with folks. I think it's helpful to sort of get all these things out and see them. And then, some are bigger costs or bigger benefits than other things. Right. So then they can really just kind of look at it externally and think through it a little bit more. There is one about resources and moving forward. So we talk about resources. We also talk about kind of what people have accomplished up to that point. And also, what are some potential barriers or issues they can foresee going forward? And how can we plan ahead to like address those? And then the last module is about sexual violence across the lifespan. And we talk about sexual violence, particularly different kinds of sexual violence or coercion people experience in the context of a relationship when there's IPV, and how that impacts them and kind of how to cope with those things. So there's a lot of different topics, and you can see how they all kind of play into the situation. But so depending on what the participant picks, we sort of go through some material on that. We have a conversation about how it applies to them. And then we finish by identifying a goal that they want to work on. And like I said, usually it pertains to what topic we talked about, right? So if we talked about self-care, it's probably, self-care related. And then when we come back together, we'll check in about how that went. So it can, I think, what's been really interesting is that, people have very different situations, but can, choose the same module and get a different experience out of it. Or I have people who choose similar modules, and then it feels like their experience is very related. So it's been very nice for, people seem to really connect with the material so far since I've been doing it.
So do you have any success stories where people either stayed or left, but because of RISE, they were able to have more agency with their own lives?
Yeah, I've had a few people that have either, they've been kind of on the fence because they like have children, for example, they don't want to uproot their children. But I have one veteran who was able to leave to get her own place and move forward, and is, kind of trying to explore other relationships, taking care of like the legal aspect of ending that relationship. And it was interesting checking in with her later.
Yeah.
We had done that sort of pro and con list, and she, people are always ambivalent about it. It's hard, right? Because leaving doesn't automatically solve everything. And I encouraged her to look at it again. I sent it to her again, and I was like, look at what these things you were concerned about, and maybe this is something to reflect on now. So definitely there have been some people who, I've had people tell me that they definitely feel more empowered. You can see the self-efficacy score going up over time. So it's been really good. I met with a couple of people today for some RISE sessions, and people have found, just talking about like the assertive communication, being able to use that in their relationships has had like a direct effect they're seeing like in their communication. So definitely a lot of good feedback so far. I've only been doing it since like February of this year. So not even a whole year doing it. I'm on, I think, my 10th or 11th veteran going through it. But definitely a lot of good feedback so far.
So does the RISE program work with other programs within the VA? Like, for instance, if a spouse chose to leave, and because of the financial control over assets, does the VA help? Like, maybe do you connect that veteran who is facing possible homelessness with the homeless outreach program? Like, how does RISE integrate with the other programs? Do you connect them as needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So RISE is kind of more of like a counseling program. So I think My job generally is to connect people to resources, so I always do that. But definitely people doing Rise as these issues come up. So like, for example, the one woman I talked about who left, she needed some help affording it. So I connected her with the SSVF, or Supportive Services for Veteran Families. For some people, it's shoring up finances, so they need help applying for benefits. So connecting to veteran service organizations. For other folks, it is identifying housing. So I connect them to homeless outreach or the CRRC. A lot of people that I'm seeing in Rise are also in their own other like ongoing therapy, or seeing a psychiatrist, like other kinds of forms of counseling. So this can be a good supplement, especially since it's shorter term, right? Usually 8 sessions is kind of the max. So it's been something that people can definitely do in conjunction with other therapeutic support and a lot of other resources within the VA, for sure.
So it doesn't happen within a vacuum. It's firmly implanted or embedded in some other programs. So there's actually nothing to lose for veterans who just want to learn how to have better relationships with people. So can people, even though, let's say could people join or be part of Rise if they don't have, like if their domestic violence situation is familial, like maybe with their parents or their siblings rather than with an like is there room for someone to learn how to be more assertive, because not all families are functional even before a person gets involved, and maybe because of that original birth family, it sort of sets them up for being in a relationship with that might have some IPV. So can you explain that a little? Like,
sure. I will say, I think generally the focus is on IPV. A lot of the people I see have experience of other types of abuse from their family or in the military.
So it's not unfamiliar territory.
Yes. I will also say my general policy is like I'm not going to just shut down anyone. So I think, case by case, if someone has these concerns and they want to explore it, we can certainly have a conversation about it. But yeah, I think that it overlaps a lot. I think what we find, unfortunately, is that, when people have experienced abuse in one way, they can be more vulnerable to experiencing it in another way. And there's a lot of different pieces of it. I think sometimes it warps our sense of trust, it impacts our self-esteem, and then kind of, what we can, how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about like maybe the treatment we deserve. I think sometimes, like I said, trust is a big one. And I think not only trust of other people, but trust of ourselves. So maybe it's harder to recognize abuse. If you're used to abusive behavior and you're like, well, this is normal, right? This is okay. So I think it can sort of like shift your understanding of like what's okay. So there's lots of different reasons, but it is unfortunately something that we often see, that people who have kind of maybe experienced one type of abuse may be more vulnerable to another one too.
So how can veterans, like if veterans wanted to be part of the RISE program, can they self refer, or do they need to rely on a referral from a PC primary care provider? Like
no, they can. Part. There's kind of no wrong door to get to RISE. People can definitely self-refer, and I think we've shared my contact information. We'll share it again. You can talk to myself or to my colleague Caitlin, and we'll kind of talk about if RISE is appropriate. We get referrals from other providers here, whether they're mental health providers, primary care providers, etc. So, and sometimes people get referred to us for something else, and we just talk about RISE as an option, and it turns out to be maybe something people are interested in. So definitely kind of whatever. If you're experiencing intimate partner violence, it's definitely something that's an option for you. As we mentioned before, screening is something that we're trying to do in a lot of the clinics. So like when you come for primary care appointments, you should be getting asked some questions about your relationship, and just know that like if you do say, I am going through this, there are options like RISE that are here to offer you support. We're not just asking you to ask you that we do want to really offer support. And so that's another way. If you say yes to some of these things on the screening questions, that can kind of generate a referral for us too. So lots of different ways to get to us, and we certainly are kind of open to whatever way people find their way.
So what is the what is the thing that you want veterans to know about IPV and RISE? Like, what is your biggest takeaway for them at this point about RISE, or being on the receiving end, or maybe feeling like they have no agency? What do you want them to know most?
I think that sometimes a barrier for people to disclose that they're experiencing IPV is that they are worried that people are going to tell them to leave or tell them what to do. And that is not my goal ever. And particularly with RISE, it's really about helping you to identify what your goals are and what your needs are in your current situation, and then working with you on how to sort of move toward that in the best, safest way possible. So maybe you want to stay in the relationship and work on things. That's your prerogative, and I'm not going to argue with you about it. It is really about how can we help you do that in a way that's safe and that can feel better and more empowering for you. And if you want to leave, that's something that we'll work on too. It's really about meeting you where you are. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm sure many people have already been well-intentioned doing that. It's really just about meeting you where you are and helping you be safe and empowered as possible.
So veterans, if you are out there experiencing some kind of IPV, whether it's gaslighting or emotional manipulation or anything, you know what you need to do. You need to call Lindsay in the RISE program, and the numbers are already in the comment section. So, Lindsay, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and explaining to us how the RISE program helps veterans who are on the receiving end of interpersonal violence. And we hope you'll all call her or Caitlin Savarese. If you're having issues, it takes a lot of courage to call for help. So take that step. And we say bye for now. Ciao. And thank you so much, Lindsay, for doing this. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.